Now, from the political wilderness just 2 years before, Republicans headed into the 1994 midterm elections with a unified team, a coherent, exciting national agenda, and a rebuilt NRCC and RNC. The coalitions that had fractured under Bush were now united, and House Republicans even had the public endorsement of Ross Perot. So 337 incumbent Republicans and candidates stood on the steps of the Capitol on September 27, 1994, and pledged that, if given the majority, they would dramatically reform Congress on the opening day and then bring to a vote all 10 initiatives within the first 100 days. They said, hold us accountable. If we break our word, throw us out. This message really cut through the cynicism of the voters. The contract with America was looking to be a fairly minor news story until the White House decided to attack it. The Clinton team, knowing they were in trouble, thought Republicans had thrown them a lifeline. If they could attack the contract, they could divert the anger against all the Democrats. And all of a sudden, though, the contract became major news. So what happened on Election Day, 1994, after all this momentum was built up? Well, not a single incumbent Republican in the House or Senate lost. House Republicans picked up 52 seats, the largest gain since 1946, and won the majority. Senate Republicans gained 8 seats, including winning all 6 Democrat open seats, and gained the majority. In governor's races, Republicans won 11 new seats, going from 19 to 30, holding 8 of the 9 most populous states. Republicans gained 484 state legislative seats, gaining control of 50 state chambers. It was just a massive win across the board. Now, after the election, Gingrich and Army made it clear that Republicans would live up to their promises and bring each bill to the floor within the first 100 days. Having the contract fully written with legislative language, as I mentioned earlier, really made it possible for the first 100 days. It would have been absolutely impossible to do it if all the language had to be negotiated and written and approved during the first 100 days. So on the opening day, major reforms were passed, including the first ever audit of the House, the reduction of committees, reduction of committee staffs, requiring the laws of the land to apply once finally to Congress, and other reforms. For the other items, the committees dutifully held their hearings, conducted their markups of the bills, and brought them to the House floor intact. Every contract item passed with a wide bipartisan majority, with one exception. The term limits plank was a constitutional amendment and required a 2/3 vote. We got a majority, but we did not get 2/3. Now, while the House kept its promise, the Senate was really not up to the task. Bills began to pile up in the Senate like firewood, leading to a great deal of angst among the Republican leaders. Fast forwarding a bit in the interest of time, while a few contract items made it into law that first year, almost all the significant proposals did eventually become law over the next few years, including up to the first year or so of George W. Bush's first term. Now, Major Garrett, now a reporter with National Journal, wrote a detailed account of the contract development and the long-term impact. And he concluded that the contract, and I quote, fundamentally changed Clinton's approach to governing. And he said it resulted in a balanced budget while cutting taxes. He said it fundamentally changed the welfare system. He said it boosted defense spending, including missile defense, and provided middle-class tax cuts and other tax cuts, and established tax-free savings accounts. Garrett also noted in his book, The Enduring Revolution, he said, and I quote again, the 104th Congress of 1995-1996 was the most important Congress of the 20th century. Quite possibly, it was the most important Congress in American history. No Congress in American history, working from such a small toehold of power, gave rise to a wider array of ideas or changed the country, its economy, its defenses, its culture, or its political processes more profoundly than the 104th Congress, end quote. But I would contend that as courageous and as effective as the contract was that year, perhaps an even more important step was taken immediately after the first 100 days. After passing a balanced budget amendment, which was part of the contract in the House, and just falling short in the Senate, there was a seminal meeting in the Ways and Means room in the U.S. Capitol. Newt, Army, DeLay, Kasich, Bill Archer, who was chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Bob Livingston, who was chairman of the Appropriations Committee, along with a very few of us leadership staff gathered to discuss next steps. Newt raised a key point. He said, if we are really serious, we should commit to work as a team to balance the budget in 7 years. Now, everybody knew what that meant, to push that all the way through the process and get it into law. Kasich's budget proposals had support of Republicans, we knew, but the president and the Democrats hated it. They discussed the difficulties of getting there and the political pain of doing so, and the need, though, to do the right thing regardless of cost. Newt went around the room and he asked each person directly. He said, are you in? Are you in? Are you in? Went all the way around the room. Everyone said yes. Thus began a 2-year effort that included 2 government shutdowns, endless meetings in the Capitol and the White House, a bitter 96 campaign, and countless votes on the floor and countless vetoes by the president. The Republican budget, which we proposed that year, included radical changes. It eliminated cabinet departments. It eliminated more than 200 federal programs. It dramatically cut discretionary spending while bringing real reform to entitlement spending such as Medicare and Medicaid. Now, setting such an ambitious goal and moving to accomplish it really motivated the coalition of economic conservatives. After the success of the first 100 days, other big things just to us seemed quite possible. Now, in the fall of '95, Republicans passed their budget bill, attached it to a continuing resolution, and sent it to the president. Unfortunately, some of the Republicans began publicly boasting that they would, quote, shut the government down if Clinton vetoed the bill. And that's exactly what happened. What followed was really a brawl, just played out in private and public for several weeks. After a grueling year, Republicans, members and staff alike, were just exhausted. And while Republicans were wearing down, Clinton was beginning to reemerge with greater vigor. After many had openly speculated about the president's relevance back early in the Republicans' years, he came storming back in the battle over the budget. But we later learned that Clinton was weakening during the shutdown, even while his political team saw that they were winning in the battle of public opinion. Dick Morris, one of his advisors, was trying to convince him to agree to a balanced budget, but in 10 years. Clinton himself was thinking out loud about a compromise, we heard. George Stephanopoulos, a White House advisor at the time, worked to keep Clinton from talking with Gingrich for fear that he would cut a deal. After much back and forth, they did reach an agreement to work towards a balanced budget in 7 years, scored by the Congressional Budget Office, if, and this is what the Clinton team added, if Medicare, Medicaid, education, and the environment were protected. Now, the Clinton team, we've learned through their writings and speeches over the years, the Clinton team thought this addition basically made it impossible to get to a balanced budget. The Republicans thought that this commitment actually boxed the White House in to reaching a budget agreement. So we came to agreement. The government reopens, temporarily though. Bickering began again, and the government shut down once more in December. This time, after a few days, Bob Dole, Senate Majority Leader, had just had enough. He was running for president, and he didn't need this distraction. So the government reopened for good in early January. But despite the messiness, the trajectory of the budget was changed. In January 1996, President Clinton introduced a budget that got to balance in 7 years. The Republicans and Democrats negotiated, and in July of 1997, an agreement was reached that balanced the budget in 7 years, while at the same time providing significant tax cuts. Again, it seems like the conservative philosophy had won. We're cutting spending and we're cutting taxes at the same time. And we saw later through greater revenue from reduced capital gains taxes, spending reductions, and revenue from a growing economy, the budget was actually balanced in less than 5 years, with projections for surpluses as far as the eye could see. So, that one meeting in the Capitol, where a few men decided to be bold, led directly to a balanced budget in a shorter period than anybody could have expected. Now, there are numerous policy battles that happened during the few years after the Republicans took the majority, but I want to highlight one particular topic, and that's welfare reform. Now, when the contract was being developed, Newt and Army insisted on a new approach to welfare reform. They turned to young Congressman Jim Talent and Dave Camp to lead the effort, building from a plan developed by the Heritage Foundation. They developed an approach that was dramatic, and it really focused on a few things. One, moving people from welfare to work, discouraging illegitimacy and teen pregnancy, reducing overall spending on welfare. Now, the bill was passed, then vetoed. Another version was passed, and then vetoed again. This was beginning to be a brawl like the budget. Now, during this period, Newt and Haley Barbour invited a group of Republican governors to participate on task forces to help spread the message. Governors John Engler from Michigan, Tommy Thompson from Wisconsin, and Mike Leavitt from Utah all spent countless days in Washington helping craft a revised welfare reform bill. And through their help, more of the programs were left to the states with lots of flexibility, but with clear targets to meet regarding moving people from welfare to work. The goal set was 50% of those on welfare needed to be working by 2002. Now, something on this scale had never really been attempted before. Cash payments were prohibited for those under 18 in order to discourage teen pregnancy and illegitimacy. Clinton finally accepted the revised bill and signed it into law in August of 1996, amid a great outcry and some resignations from his team. Now, did welfare make a difference? Did welfare reform make a difference? Let's look at the numbers. Welfare caseload dropped from 8.4 million in 1996 to 3 million in June of 98 and down to 2 million by 2002. These numbers had been increasing every year since 1936. The work rates increased from 13% to 23% between 96 and 98. And poverty rates actually declined. There were 3.5 million fewer people in poverty in 2095. Now, the whole point of welfare reform was not just to save money, but to restore personal responsibility among those in need. We did not see lines of poor people in response. Rather, we saw more and more former welfare recipients gaining jobs and gaining dignity. And that's really what it was all about. Now, let's look at the politics in the 96 election. Now, during the summer of 96, Clinton and Bob Dole were squaring off in their own presidential race, with Clinton having a fairly solid lead. Conservatives were not thrilled about Dole, particularly after the excitement that built up after the 1994 revolution. Most conservatives saw Dole as just another establishment Republican in the mold of George H.W. Bush. But Dole bested conservative candidates such as Phil Gramm and Steve Forbes, but he never really consolidated his support, even after choosing Jack Kemp as his running mate. And it became clear that Dole was on a losing path, and party leaders began to focus more and more on winning House and Senate races. So in November of 96, Bill Clinton, who had really almost been written off back in 95, came back to win a second term. This time as a candidate who famously said, "The era of big government is over." The same president who pushed universal health care, gays in the military, and tax increases now was a president who was just reelected who had signed welfare reform and agreed to balance the budget in 7 years. Quite a change. So conservatives, even though it was a bit messy during parts of those times, really felt like we were still on the ascendancy, that our policies were winning and people were agreeing with the philosophical approach that conservatives had taken. Now, one of the most incredible things that happened during the government shutdown a couple years earlier was that President Clinton became, how shall we say it, close to a young intern named Monica Lewinsky. And when the news broke in January 1998, it set in motion a whirlwind of activities. It reopened interest in the other alleged indiscretions of the president with women while he was governor of Arkansas, as well as the Whitewater land deal issue. Now, Kenneth Starr was chosen to be the independent counsel to lead this overall investigation. Now, this issue became a huge distraction for the Republican leadership. Many members wanted to pile on the president and make this a real defining issue. Others thought we should continue our policy focus and not get distracted. But when Clinton was found to have lied under oath, it made it impossible to ignore. The 1998 elections were expected to help grow the Republican majority, but instead, they lost seats in the House. Newt had been very public about big gains being made, and the disappointment became anger. Now, and most of it was directed at Newt and the other Republican leaders. Bob Livingston, who I mentioned earlier, was the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, decided to challenge Newt, and Newt decided to step down and resign from Congress altogether. John Boehner, who was the conference chairman at the time, also was defeated. And Army and DeLay survived, though Army had a challenge. But Livingston was ready to assume the speakership when it was revealed that he also had been in an extramarital affair, and he abruptly resigned. So Denny Hastert became the consensus candidate to become the new speaker. Can you sense some disarray happening around this time? Now, Denny Hastert was a good man, trusted by everyone. He was not really a visionary, and he had no discernible ego, but he had an excellent mind for policy and for gaining trust among the members. Now, looking back, as with a little bit of benefit of time, it became clear that much of the momentum from '94 was spent. The freshmen elected in '94 were really true revolutionaries. In '96, the class was kind of mixed. And in '98, it largely looked more and more like a group that enjoyed serving in positions of power. Things were clearly changing. President Clinton was impeached by the House in December of '98 on 2 counts, perjury and obstruction of justice, but the Senate failed to convict him.